Hi there, my name is Ann Mostue. I'm a reporter here at WGBH. It's 7 weeks until Boston's preliminary mayoral election. The field of candidates is now at 12. It will be at 2 after that date, after September 24th. We're doing a weekly web series here to talk about the race as it's going. And with me to talk about that is David Bernstein, a contributor here at WGBH and a Boston Magazine, and Peter Kadzis, a contributor here at WGBH. Let's start by talking about Charlotte Golar-Ritchie. She's the only female candidate for mayor, African-American, lives in Dorchester, and was on Boston Herald Radio this week, where, well, she wasn't on it. Menino was talking about her on Boston Herald Radio and made some comments. Do you want to talk about that a little bit, Peter?
Sure. I mean, it was even better than being on the show. It's a very curious episode in this election. Tom Menino said quite rightly that if Golar-Ritchie was elected as a woman and as an African American, that would attract national attention. The next day, the Herald made it seem as if he had all but endorsed her.
Right.
On their own radio show, the very next question was, is this an endorsement for Golar-Ritchie? And he said something to the effect of, no, 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 no. That somehow didn't make it into the paper. It's a curious thing. I mean, it certainly helped her in terms of visibility, but I think there's another edge to it. Let's not forget, most people may like Menino, but they're glad he's going. So his endorsement is probably not as much, it isn't as valuable as quietly throwing support behind someone. That's my take on it anyway.
Yeah, and I agree that the Herald blew this out of all proportion because they want to try to make news out of their new radio station so that they can promote the radio station and back and forth and so on. Great synergy there, but I'm not sure it was actually very truthful. But just to give you an example, there was a much more interesting thing that the Menino committee contributed to Rob Consalvo's campaign, the first contribution from the Menino committee to a mayoral candidate's campaign. That didn't get the same amount of play, even though it's a much more tangible show of support. I think that what we have is that Menino clearly has a couple of candidates who he would prefer over certain other candidates to be his successor. And, he's going to find little ways of signaling that. And I think that the comment about Charlotte was a little signal to that. That's far from the kind of full-fledged endorsement, let alone putting his people behind it, than a real endorsement.
Right. And we don't know who's really fighting for Menino's endorsements or who wants them. But the candidates have been very polite so far, for the most part. But we are seeing some difficult words, maybe, from DA Dan Conley toward his rival and fellow neighborhood resident, John Connolly, who's a city councilor. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
To help keep them straight, I've begun referring to them as Danley and Johnley.
Fair enough.
That'll help people out. Clearly, what's been happening is that people are perceiving John Connolly, the city councilor from West Roxbury, as getting a certain head start from his early start and good polling, good organization. So before he gets too far out as a front runner, they want to start trying to jab at him, bring him down a little bit. That's a little bit of what was happening. Also, clearly, Dan Conley is fishing in the same pond for voters as John Connolly and Marty Walsh, who he's also taken a couple shots at. So he's naturally going to be fighting with them a little bit. And I think also some of what's happening is that John Connolly has been very effective at getting public education, public school reform, to be sort of the big topic of the race so far, which is his ground, and so I think some of the other candidates are starting to try to pull the conversation onto other topics that they think are more preferable to them, and one way to do that is to try to draw John out on other topics so that he's playing on their territory.
Yeah, also on Radio Herald, Conley gave State Representative Marty Walsh a little bit of a zing, talking about, Walsh wasn't as clear on charter schools and stuff as he was. I mean, what's interesting is I think the sum effect of all this is to more or less set up Johnley and Marty Walsh as the two front runners in the race. It's a thin string to hang front runnership on, but that's what we got so far.
Yeah. Well, each candidate seems to be pulling out with one issue that we're starting to. And Bill Walczak has brought in casinos, and he's been very outspoken this past week about his opposition to a casino in East Boston. Any comment on that? What do you think?
Well, Adam Riley had a great spot, which I'm sure is online, about it. And it's a good issue for Walczak, but it was surprising that more people didn't show up. I think that the casino is overblown as an issue. I have the perhaps eccentric view that Boston is not the front runner, that Everett may be the front runner, and I think the Gaming Commission, in effect, is going to have more influence than anyone in Boston politics. I don't know what David thinks about that, but
well, I think that it is again trying to bring the conversation away from schools onto some other topics. Walczak clearly thought that he could sort of own this topic a little bit, and that's helpful. Dan Conley has actually been trying to work the casino topic for a while. He sent a letter a couple months ago to Steve Murphy as the head of the city council, asking the city council to hold hearings about doing a citywide vote instead of the East Boston vote. Steve Murphy slapped that down in a kind of rude way. So they're trying to find ways that they can pull the topics onto what they want. Dan Conley risked a lot of votes in East Boston where they don't want the citywide vote, but perhaps, again, he's playing in that territory, sort of in the southwest corridor of West Roxbury, Roslindale, Hyde Park. Maybe it helps them a little bit there. They're all looking to find these little pieces. And the other interesting thing quickly is if you see who they're poking at, they're not poking at some of the candidates who they think are likely to lose in the preliminary and whose endorsement or whose voters they want. So, for instance, there's not a lot of going after a Charlotte Golar-Ritchie or a Mike Ross or a Felix Arroyo, who have some of the progressive and minority candidates that they want to be able to get in the second round.
Right, exactly. All right, well, that'll do it for this week. Tune in next week. We, again, are 7 weeks away from Boston's preliminary mayoral election. 12 candidates, and then there will be 2. For WGBH, I'm Ann Mostue.